Mary and Joseph to quietly enter Bethlehem and to go to the stable ever so gently and meekly and have that baby. I want to hear cattle lowing and angels singing sweet and loving lullabies. I certainly don't want to hear the likes of John screaming at me. I remember once complaining to a colleague of mine about John and lamenting the fact that we had to deal with him during Advent. You know, I said, I can handle God most of the time and Jesus some of the time, but knowing that John the Baptist is around scares me. I just have this image of his eyes boring a hole right through me into the depths of my soul. My friend looked at me and said, you know what? That's just what John is supposed to do. If his eyes weren't seeing through us, nothing would ever change. That's the whole point of having John around these days. Now, on one level, I know that, but I just don't want to have to change things in my life right now. I don't want to be reminded that in order to be ready for that sweet little baby to be born soon, we're supposed to be changing our minds about things. And that's just what John is talking about. As much as we may like to have everything in our lives orderly and predictable, it just isn't going to happen. And if we're really going to be honest with ourselves, we have to admit that the same old worn-out ideas aren't going to help us get ready for the change that Jesus brings into the world. It's time that we learn we need to change our minds about some parts of our lives and be willing to learn the lessons John is trying to teach us. John's presence in our lives during these weeks of Advent should compel us to think about what needs to be turned right side up in our lives. And more than just thinking about it, we need to figure out what actions we can take as people of God to turn things right side up. This is a story written by Sarah Fogler about unexpected change and how it transformed one congregation. The new minister was a young woman named Mary, who had just finished her seminary studies. She was the only type this congregation could afford, and the only kind willing to take on a dying church with a budget crisis. Once upon a time, it was a big steeple church in a neighborhood full of noteworthy members, most of whom lived nearby. But now, the congregation was composed of faithful older members, most of whom drove in from safer suburbs out of a sense of obligation, or because they truly loved the place so full of sacred memories. 3 of the church members, all women, objected to the idea of hiring a female pastor. They thought she wouldn't be safe in the neighborhood, which really meant they thought a woman couldn't do this sort of work. No comment. Mary had arrived in July with all kinds of exuberance and new ideas, the very sound of which made many of the church members nervous. Some of the elders saw the writing on the wall years before and had made some well-intentioned attempts to meet the needs of the changed neighborhood. They started a food pantry and a clothing closet, but these weren't very successful in spite of the ongoing donations from church members. Sadly, the word never got out around the neighborhood about the pantry and the closet, so 2 huge, unused Sunday school classrooms remained filled with things like warm coats and canned soup. Mary took it upon herself to make the rounds in the area, introducing herself to folks who had trouble understanding English or who displayed open disdain for this young, enthusiastic female pastor. However, after a while, some of the area people started coming to church. At first, out of curiosity, and then because the pastor wasn't half bad as far as a white female preacher was concerned. The old-timers were so pleased that the church was starting to grow again, they began paying more attention to Mary's ideas. During Advent, one year close to Christmas, Mary had the bright idea that the church should host a party after worship and invite the entire neighborhood to come. They could have a turkey dinner, sing Christmas carols, and give presents to the neighborhood children. When she presented her ideas to the elders, they were more than a little bit hesitant. They wanted to know who was going to do all the cooking and where the presents would come from, and most importantly, who was going to clean up the mess when it was all over. One of the elders said with eyes full of fire, "Look, Mary, we're trying to keep up with you here, but you're just plain moving too fast for us. Maybe we're not ready for you." Angry and disappointed by the wet blanket reaction, Mary decided she was going ahead with the party no matter what. Even if she had to do all the cooking and gift buying and cleaning up herself, there was going to be a party. Mary announced her plans and settled on the third Sunday in Advent as the day for the party. She was tired of banging her head against the wall with these people. One sign of hope, she prayed, just give me one sign of hope. The next day, God, who speaks in amazing ways, sent Mary not one, but 3 clear signs. Old Zeke McAfee, whose grandparents were charter members of the church and who was one of the worst offenders when it came to resisting the pastor, called Mary and offered to cook the turkeys. He even offered to buy them. Marge King, one of the 3 women who didn't vote to hire Mary, stopped by the office and told Mary that she had heard about the party, and even though she didn't think anyone would show up, the women in the prayer group were ready to buy new children's books, wrap them, and have them ready for the day of the party. Finally, John Morgan, one of the few people who supported Mary's efforts, came by and volunteered to lead a cleanup committee. Mary sent a sincere thank you to God right there and then. Mary had 500 flyers printed and left them all over the neighborhood, and wherever she could, she talked up the event. She sought out community leaders, telling them this wasn't about charity, it was about celebration. As the plans unfolded, a few more church folks stepped up to the challenge of offering contributions: green bean casserole, squash pie, angel food cake. Someone even offered to play Santa Claus. Even so, there were still plenty of resistors who thought the whole party was overly ambitious or terribly undignified, or both. But Mary was happy with the support she received this far anyway. About a week before the event, which was now being called the Christmas Festival, a young man called Flash stopped by to talk with Mary. He explained that he had a rap group and had written a Christmas song, and he wanted to know if he and his group could present the rap at the festival. Mary didn't think twice. "Yes, of course," came her reply. But she decided to wait a little bit before she announced this rap addition to the elders. Once the word got out about the rappers, there were more requests for time slots for the festival committee lineup. A young woman named Naomi wanted to sing her version of Silent Night. A group of stump dancers asked if they could be in the party. "Don't worry about your floors," they said. "We have our own platforms and we can drag them in the day before." An older group of harmony singers felt called to offer their rendition of "Oh Happy Day." Before Mary knew it, she had a show on her hands. On Friday, she called all of the elders and tried to gently explain that there was going to be some neighborhood participation. A few of them wanted to know what she meant by participation. And she simply said, "Oh, you know, music." One of the elders replied, "You're not fooling anyone, you know." Early Saturday morning, Mary got ready for the day of hard work. She wanted everything in the church to say, "Welcome." She was surprised to find John Morgan and his daughter Alice had already set tables around the room in a circle. More tables were lined up near the kitchen to be used as a buffet. A church member who had not graced the door of the church for years read about the party in the church newsletter and brought over a large roll of green paper table covering. The room looked very festive when the stomp dancers showed up with their equipment. Flash showed up with an audio system. The prayer group women arrived with a decorated laundry basket filled with wrapped children's books. John came up with the idea of bringing some of the coats and warmer clothing items downstairs and putting a "free for the taking" sign on them. On the morning of the festival, the church was unusually full. The increased attendance was partly due to the Christmas season, but it was also prompted by plain old curiosity. People wanted to see what was going to happen after worship. Rumors of the irreverent activity had spread like wildfire. Marge King wanted to know if there was going to be dancing because, for the record, she was opposed to dancing of any kind in the social hall. Mary noticed that the hymns were being sung with extra gusto that day, and she took it as a sign that God was indeed renewing this congregation in love. Mary watched as a little girl, probably of Korean descent, placed a Christmas card in the offering plate. The service ended with the rousing Welsh hymn, "Rejoice, rejoice, believers." And Mary, who was the first to admit that singing was not one of her gifts, threw caution to the wind and openly resented her off tones. The festival began cautiously as people politely filled their plates with food. There was more food than anyone could have imagined, because neighborhood folks brought all sorts of dishes to share. As more and more guests arrived, the noise level increased dramatically. But Mary was disappointed to see that church members were sitting with church members, and neighborhood folk were sitting with other neighborhood people. Mary bravely stood up on a chair and asked people to get up and sit next to someone they had never met before. After a lot of moaning and groaning, Mary was pleased to see conversations springing up all over the room. The program began with a sing-along led by the church choir. Next came Flash and his rappers, who offered a tune they called "Ho Ho Diddy." There was good participation on this one, although it was clear that the elder members of the congregation were more challenged than some others. Naomi offered a sultry and stirring version of "Silent Night," which brought tears to the eyes of some people. Then came the Stompers. Mary thought the whole thing was remarkable. She had never seen anyone move feet that fast before. Marge King, however, proved how deeply offended she was by walking out on the event. Final entertainment was delivered by Old Zeke was seen two-stepping with a little neighborhood girl, and by this point almost everyone was clapping to the beat, or at least trying to. And those who knew the words joined in singing the joyful song. When it was all over, Mary was exhausted and thrilled and very grateful to God. Cleanup didn't take nearly as long as anticipated because plenty of people stayed to help. Almost all the worn clothing disappeared. Mary remained in the building long after the place was cleaned up and everyone had left. Sitting in an old wooden chair reflecting on the day, Mary noticed a Christmas card lying on her desk. A note attached to the card read, "Found card in the offering plate. Think it's for you." She opened the card and watched a young hand scrawled in crayon, "Merry Christmas, Pastor Mary." You know, maybe having John the Baptist hanging around us, calling us to change our minds, isn't such a bad thing after all. It could be that John's words about changing our direction and getting ourselves turned around is really God's way of preparing us for the change that will be entering our lives very soon. Perhaps in these days, just before the birth, we can actually find something worth preparing for. May John's words ring in our ears and fill our hearts. Share with one another. Be kind to one another. Don't fight. Be fair. Don't hoard or boss others around. In these days of uncertainty and doubt, may we learn to trust God's goodness and grace and prepare for the promise of hope and joy that will enter the world once again. Amen. Along with joys, we often have concerns. Here are the concerns to be shared this morning.
I have concern. I'd like prayers for my friend Pat